Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. So I want to talk about some things that I've learned from being a software developer. So I'm just coming up on 2 years doing this full time, and hopefully I've learned a couple things along the way that maybe I can pass on in this video that somebody might find helpful. I wrote some stuff down that I'm going to try to go on. It's going to be like 5 tips of what I've learned on this software developer journey so far. The quick rundown of all the tips are: number 1, take care of yourself. Number 2, don't get stuck in tutorials. Number 3, take on difficult tasks. 4, easy does it. 5, forget the language. So I'm going to break down each of those 5 tips in this video. So I don't want to make it super formal either, and I don't want to use any of the typical buzzwords, hopefully that you hear. Like, you're always going to hear, the one, be a lifelong learner and ask questions. And it's like, we got that. We understand those 2 things because they're obvious. So I'm going to try to skip those and just go over the ones that I think are helpful, or at least that came to mind for me. So the first one is take care of yourself. And obviously it sounds selfish, right, at first hand, like, take care of yourself. Like, what does that mean? In the context of what I'm talking about here is specifically in the corporate environment, in the workplace. You have to set boundaries for yourself, and you have to say no to certain things, because I feel like the more you put yourself in the position where you're gonna work beyond the hours that you signed on to do, so the 8 hours, the more and more you will see that time begin to creep into your own life. And it's fine. You should work hard in what you do. But I think there's also an element to that in terms of how do you plan and organize your work life so that it doesn't begin to overflow into your personal life. Because we all have heard or seen examples of people who stay late at the office and it affects their family life, and they can't do XYZ. We've all seen examples of that, and you don't want to you don't want to be that person. And I know it's difficult to do, and obviously things need to get done, but you need to learn to set boundaries and take care of yourself. And the other aspect I want to include in this is you have to take care of yourself physically. You have to go on walks. You have to stretch regularly, because think about this. I'm sitting at this desk here, and generally I'm sitting like this, right? Like, I'm looking straight in front of me. I'm not up walking around. And over a prolonged period of time, your body's going to get tense. Your muscles are going to tighten up, especially your hip and your leg muscles and your back. They're all going to tense up on you, and that's going to cause a whole host of problems later on in the future. And you don't want that. So you got to maintain that at an early spot. And right now I do a bad job at it. This is a huge reminder to myself to try to improve that. But at least for me, like, I try to go on walks during the afternoon, and then I'll go to the gym after work. But during the day, I feel like I should be stretching more than what I do, because I can feel myself tightening up. And I notice for me personally, when I get super tight or tense, I start to get a headache, and that obviously will impact you in a number of ways. So you have to just be mindful of that in terms of how are you impacted by prolonged periods of sitting and looking also at a screen, because that can cause certain eye issues to occur. So the overarching theme is just take care of yourself, and whatever that means for you, just try to do that. Number 2 is don't get stuck in tutorials. I think the biggest spot or pitfall for junior developers is to get in a spot where they just watch a ton of videos thinking that they're going to absorb all that information from the video. And I know I did and still do the same thing sometimes. Like, I'll go on Stack Overflow and look at some answers and read a couple answers, and I'm not really sure what they're using. So I'll go and try to look up a tutorial video about it, and I just get lost. I'm like, oh man, I don't know this basic concept. And it's good to watch tutorial videos, but it's very hard to learn when you don't have any context to it, and when you don't have any application that you can directly apply it to. Which is why it's so important to have personal projects before you're a software developer, so you can learn those concepts, but in a practical way. So you're not just absorbing information, right? It's like reading a textbook, like for school, like, and not doing any problems afterwards. You're going to get the information, but the odds of you retaining that information are like slim to none. Like, I was in high school, I graduated high school, I think 6 years ago, and just like thinking back to those classes, like I remember so little, especially from like history class and things like that, just because generally it's just a lot of reading and not a lot of like application. So the same thing can happen when you're a developer. Like, I can read a programming book and get nothing out of it if I don't know how to apply it to my code or whatever. So just be mindful of that. So don't get stuck in tutorials. Number 3 is take on difficult tasks. Now, obviously, this one is a little buzzwordy. I'll give you that one. This one is a little generic. For me, in a practical sense, then I think it was about a month ago, I picked up one that had some stuff with AWS and uploading something to an S3 bucket in AWS. And I'd never done that before. So taking it on was like, I don't know how this is going to go. So, but I was able to do it ultimately. And over that period of time, the 2 weeks for the sprint, I feel like I learned a lot. And I can now say, like, I know how to do that if I ever need to do that in the future. Or if I need to help somebody do it. And it's very daunting to take on a task that you don't think you know all the answers to. But honestly, if you think about it, I think that's a majority of what programming tasks are, because you can't know the entire code base. There's always going to be something weird about whatever code you're looking at, some kind of gotcha for whatever spot. You think it's going to work this way, but in reality, you got to build out this whole new endpoint for some service to do something. And that's just the reality of programming. That's what we kind of signed up for, it is just to be problem solvers. That's really the job. It's just the problem. Here's the problem, and just figure it out. Taking on difficult tasks kind of enables that, and it gets you thinking about how to solve, because a lot of times if you take on tasks that you're comfortable with, you're kind of operating them on just autopilot. You're not really putting as much thought into it, compared to a problem that you don't know how to solve. For me, I take on a lot of so a big part of my job is we do bug fixes for customers, and some of those can get kind of mundane, right? Like they kind of just, I'm working on them on autopilot just because I kind of know what the problem is in the back of my head, and the solution's fairly obvious just because I've done it so many times before. So I don't really learn out of those, you know what I mean? And if you never give yourself the opportunity to take on difficult tasks, you're always going to be stuck in that one path. And the other negative to this is that if you're looking to grow as in your career, if you get stuck in that rut of just doing the same thing, you're going to have a harder time kind of moving to that next step if you're trying to do that. And especially if you're looking for another job, if you get stuck in a rut of the same thing, you might have a harder time talking about that to another employer, or if you're just stuck in that one technology. That's what I've kind of seen, I guess, and that's what my, opinion of it is. And I think that really goes back to, the take care of yourself idea, because you have to, I think, be looking out for yourself a little bit in terms of the workload you take on and the projects that you get put on, because if you never ask, nobody's going to know that you want to work on this. So you have to just say, hey, I see we're doing this project, or I see we're doing this, or we're moving this direction. Can I contribute to that, or can I get put on that team, or the team I'm on's not working out? Can we got to refocus, we got to shift. And that's a healthy thing to do. And I think that there's an expectation there that developers kind of do that a little bit, because think about this from the manager perspective. It's not really in their interest to shuffle around the teams to help you grow, just because if they find a good spot where a developer is really doing well and kind of getting in that rut, they're not going to move them, because that's not what it's about. It's about how do you maintain, and how do you get the most efficient results. That's really, whether or not people want to admit it, I think that's really what the goal, right, of businesses. How do you make a larger profit? So you have to stand up for yourself a little bit in that respect, and that's what I've seen a little bit too. And obviously, it's good to voice your opinion. It's an important part of who we are, and it's good to know where do you stand, where you work at, and it's not easy to do sometimes, but I think it's important, and I think that you're going to get a lot of value out of it if you choose to do that. So anyway, that's take on difficult tasks. Number 4 is easy does it. What I mean by this is you got to learn to pace yourself. If you work in any kind of like work environment where it's like you're working in a sprint, so all that sprint and agile, literally all that is a fancy way of saying you just work in like week increments, but we put on all this fancy language and we call it like agile and scrum and kanban. It's like, do you know what that means? Does anyone who's not working in this know what that means? Why can't we just say I don't know, but that's, yeah. So if you're working any kind of like week sprints, so I work in like 2-week sprints, you got to learn to kind of pace yourself, right? Because the goal of a sprint is to figure out how much work can we get done in this time period. And it's an estimate. It always is. It's software is an estimate of we think we're going to get this done. So you got to pace yourself because a sprint is designed around, let's use the 2 weeks. So that's 2 weeks. So 2 40-hour weeks. That's what it's built around. It's not designed for you to cram as much stuff as you can, working overtime, working weekends. That's not the intent. And if that's the intent, then that's bad management, and that's bad ownership of the product. And if you're in that kind of environment, I'd be looking for another job, to be honest, because you're going to burn out and like super fast. A sprint is designed to figure out velocity of how much can we get done. So if you don't get your task done in a sprint and you put in all your time into that, that's okay, because then we know, then we move it to the next sprint, and that's what it's designed for. If you're working in an environment where the deadlines are, you can't allow for that, I think there's larger issues, and I don't think that's a developer issue, because software is not that or black and white. It's software is an estimate, and we think we're gonna have this done here. It's like any kind of other work that you get an estimate for, like your car mechanic, somebody working on your house. It's always an estimate of time, and obviously you're going to get better at that estimate over time, and you can't overshoot or undershoot that estimate, obviously, and that's another skill in itself, and that's why that's why you should have some kind of product owner or management that handles that, and that burden shouldn't be placed on the developer. The developer should only be concerned really about how do I build this product in the best, most efficient way that's written in clean code. That's really the goal of the developer. And sometimes it's hard to focus on that. Sometimes, and I do it all the time, like I focus on how much time have I put into this and how much time have we estimated to this, and am I going to finish in time? And I notice that once I start doing that, I work, the quality of my work, I think, goes down a little bit, just because I psych myself out because I think that there's like some hard sprint deadline. And I've seen it a little bit in some people, they'll work beyond the time to do that. And that's okay. Like you might need to do that in certain circumstances. But you really need to pace yourself because you should be leveraging the sprint and because if you get all that done in that sprint, that means the number of points that they loaded into that sprint are okay, and they're going to load the same in the next week's sprint, and you're going to have the same issue. You're going to have to work more hours. That's what I'm saying, because if you don't get it done, they'll know that they can't load the next sprint with as many points because the team didn't finish, and that's a good thing. That's what you need to know. That's what you need to know your team's, like how much work can they get done. That's what you need to know. So pacing yourself is important because the moment you start moving that to weekends and working later and later, that the more it's going to become, the more frequent it's going to become. And that shouldn't be the case in any kind of like corporate setting where there's management to handle that. That just means that the management it doesn't know what the developers are doing, and that's not a good spot to be in. And there also should be somebody should be having ownership of the product and to understand, am I using the sprints in the right way? And that's difficult, but the burden shouldn't be on the developer, but a lot of times it is. So you gotta understand that you need to go easy on how many hours you're putting into this operation here. The last tip I have is you have to forget the language. The language, meaning programming language like C#, Java, whatever it is. You have to forget the language. You can't be so tightly coupled to one language, one technology, one framework, because it might change in the future. And if you ever want to grow, if you ever want to move somewhere else to a new job because you want a pay raise or whatever the reason is, they're probably going to use different technologies, different frameworks. And if you get so tightly coupled to the one you're working in and never want to change at all, you might be missing out on some good opportunities for yourself. And another reason is that all these technologies and frameworks and languages, they're always being updated and changing all the time. And if you start to get so tightly coupled to one language, you might just become that guy on Stack Overflow who just is critical of everyone's posts and explains how 30 years ago when he was using the language, it worked like this, so we should keep using like this. So it's like, no, you got to be open-minded. You got to be open to change, and you have to be open to using potentially a new language if you do want to, I think, advance in your career. Now, some people stay at the same job, and some people use the same language the whole time, which is fine, and it's great. And you just have to figure out what you like. But I think the main thing I'm driving at here is that if you ever plan on starting something for yourself, like starting some kind of business or building something from scratch and selling it or making some kind of service, people don't care what you made that in. The only, from what I've gathered, from what I've seen, the only time people ever care what you make anything in is when you apply to the job or you just graduated school. But once you have the job and once you're out of school, like, people don't care at all. It's all about marketing. That's really the main thing about this. If you make anything, if you make any business, if you make any side project, anything, you can make it. You can use the craziest technology ever. You can have that thing running in the craziest microservice infrastructure you've ever seen. It's running Kubernetes. We got you could have anything like that, and nobody cares. Nobody cares at all. The only person who would care is like your other developer friend who is interested in this stuff, but that's not your target market. If you make a product, you need to have it. You need to market it, and that's the entire thing. Marketing is probably one of the most important parts of any kind of project or business at all. I mean, obviously programming and building the product that's just obvious. So you have to have the product, but if nobody knows about it, if nobody understands what it is and who you are and what the product does and how it adds value to them, you're not gonna get any success from it. And frankly, nobody cares if it's written in C#, Java, PHP. No, it could be written in Visual Basic, and nobody would know the difference. Like, it's obviously you're gonna know the difference, and there's gonna be a maintainability aspect to that. But if you're trying to like leverage some kind of side business, if you're trying to market yourself, you got to forget the language. You got to understand that you need the business, like you need some kind of network or marketing side to talk about this with or get it out there. And I know it stinks because it's like you invest so much time into learning the languages and all these frameworks and everything like that, but it's kind of it's like a paradox, right? Like you have to learn that to get the job, but then once you get the job, you learn that those things don't really matter. And I know it stinks, and that's just the way it is. And it's like, for my mind, like, you sink all that time into learning it at school and doing these side projects so you can get the interview or internship and get the job, whatever it is. And then it's like, okay, forget all that. We use this one old framework, and we're going to use this from moving forward. And it's like, okay, so they're basically, you need to forget all the stuff that you learned to to get the job or internship or interview, whatever it is. And I know it's not easy to hear, but it's just kind of the nature of it. And the more you, I think, understand that, the more you'll be motivated and I think driven to try to start something for yourself. And I think that should be a goal, and somewhere in your timeline is to say, okay, I have, these skills. I have this knowledge of programming languages. I can build anything, really anything. And all you need is an idea. Okay, it's like, I'm putting in this much amount of time into a company to build their product, to build somebody else's dream. But I could be also doing that, but also on the side, developing, making a new idea, creating something new or something existing, but doing it in a better way, and getting it out there. So you start to slowly get out of the office and creating what you want to do. And that could be a whole video in itself, but it's crazy to me that, man, I don't get it. It's crazy to me how complacent we become, and I'm included in this. It's like you start to lose sight of that curiosity or that passion you had when you started out development. And think about it, if you maintain that throughout your career, you will probably be very successful. And I know that's not what it's all about. It's not all about success. It's a lot about freedom. You need freedom in your life. You need to be free of kind of that huge dependency of working for somebody else. And you have to in the beginning. You have to do that to start out, but you should always be thinking in the back of your mind, is there something that I could be doing? Is there something that would allow me to be not dependent on anybody? And if there is, if you see an opportunity, try to invest some time into it. Try to understand, is this a legitimate market? Is this an area that I can add value to? And if it is, or even if you think it is, you got to try. I mean, you got to try. That way, I mean, if you fail, then okay, it didn't work out, but then you try again with something else. But the key to how this works with programming is you got to do it on the side. You got to keep your programming job to have your income to live, and try to make that remote, so that way you cut out the commute time, so you get an hour and a half back in your day to then invest into whatever the side thing is. That's the best model I think that I've seen or thought about, is doing that. But anyway, thank you. Man, that was a long tangent. How many? Man, we're at about 25 minutes. So thank you all for watching the video. If you want to hear anything more about just really what I've learned as a developer, or if I can help you out in any way, let me know in the comments. Really appreciate it. Thank you all for watching the video. Hopefully this added some kind of value to you. Anyway, thank you all for watching. Have a good one.